All right, good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Good to see all of your smiling faces. Thank you for joining on to this Zoom. This is the first of many conversations that we're going to have known as Courageous Conversations. So we're going to go through an introduction of what the Courageous Conversations are. We're going to set the stage, but I'm so excited for us to participate and engage in this conversation this evening because this is a conversation that needs to be had in our community as we continue to be informed as we make informed decisions. So once again, I want to thank you all for being on this Zoom. Once again, this is the first of many. So this is a courageous conversation. The topic and the theme for this evening is it is an elevation of the American criminal justice system, and more specifically as it impacts African Americans today. So we have a dynamic and engaging presenter today that we're going to introduce. This is presented on behalf of our Commonwealth of Pennsylvania educational team. I see a bunch of members on here this evening, as well as our executive board. Welcome, welcome. We are members of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated, who our ideals are brotherhood, scholarship, and service. And this particular program, this particular initiative falls under the aspect of our education ideal, because we promote education and promote the betterment of our community through culture for service and service for humanity. So once again, we appreciate everything that you guys are on here and hope you guys are ready to engage in our conversation. So we're going to set the stage. Most people ask, what is a courageous conversation? And I'm glad you asked that question, because a courageous conversation is a dialogue in which participants commit to engaging one another, to be honest, to be open-minded, to be vulnerable, most importantly, to listen deeply and to understand each other's perspectives. Now, these conversations can be uncomfortable, but more importantly, it is a catalyst for change. We have a lot of different things going on in our community and around us that need to have change going on. So this is the first initial conversation where we're bringing in experts in the field, experts with the themes, so that we can be informed and we can take action on it. The courageous conversation model has 4 spokes that we're going to kind of dip into this evening as we engage in this conversation. We want to kind of lean on our moral aspect of what we believe, what our soul is, as well as our intellectual piece, what we're thinking, where our head is at, where our mindset is. We want to lean on the emotional aspects, how we're feeling, what happens in our heart, what comes out of our heart, and most importantly, the relational piece. What are our actions that we're doing? What are we doing with our hands and feet? How are we acting with the information that we're giving? So all that to be said, that these 4 spokes and the entire courageous conversation model is a structure that can be applied to any difficult conversation that needs to be had in our community. But more importantly, it's an organized way for us to discuss and engage in different things. During this courageous conversations, we want to commit to 4 agreements during this conversation. The first commitment or agreement that we want to have as listeners and participants is we want to stay engaged. And I'm going to say in the next slide what engagement looks like during these particular sessions. We want to focus on the impact, expect that our experience that we have might be it might show discomfort. It might be uncomfortable for us, but we still need to engage in this conversation. Thirdly, we want to agree to everybody speaking their truth. We want to focus on what is true to us. Everybody's experiences is different, but we want to make sure we speak and we articulate what our truth is and express ourselves. And last but not least, and this by far is one of the hardest things that when we have these conversations is to expect and to accept that there might be a lack of closure. These conversations are to begin the initial piece and the initial action of moving things forward. We're not going to solve every problem that we come place. That's not what this model is for. This model is so that we can begin and make a more informed decision as we bring experts to the table. All right, hope we can all commit to those and agree to those things. All right, so what does getting engaged look like? Getting engaged looks like, as you know, most of us in this particular time and age should be familiar with Zoom. But if you're not, please find your chat space. You can always throw comments in the chat. I'll make sure that I look at those and we engage that with our speaker. So if you have any immediate comments, any questions, anything, please throw that in the chat and I'll make sure that we read that and we bring that up to the surface. You can also raise your virtual hand. So there's a feature in Zoom. If you're not familiar with it, please find the icon to raise your hand. And you can raise your hand and I will call on you to unmute when the time is allowed so we can speak. You can ask your direct question or your comment and we'll go from there. Last but not least, and most importantly, we have a survey that I'll put the link in the chat as well that we're asking for you to fill out. This allows us to get some feedback for the particular session that we're having so that we can improve as we're moving forward to other sessions and as we improve as we're moving to other things. But also gives you another opportunity to comment and ask the questions directly to our expert, to our speaker, to our keynote speaker. So if you have any questions, she'll be sure to email you back directly and be sure to answer as many questions as we can. So this is how you get engaged. There's 3 ways to get engaged: by commenting in the chat, in the Zoom chat space, raising your virtual hand so you can unmute and speak when the time is allowed, and more importantly, complete the survey towards the end of the session, okay? So I'm so excited to introduce our speaker for this evening, our expert on this particular topic, as well as many others. But I am so proud to introduce to you Dr. Teisha Durpree-Wilson. As you see, I'm gonna go through her bio. There's a couple points of the accomplishments. I had to take it to 3 or 4 slides because she has accomplished so much in her lifetime, and she continues to do different things. But as you see the bullets on there, so if you engage with me real briefly, I'm gonna read through her bio. Dr. Teisha Durpree-Wilson is an assistant professor of history at Coppin State University, which specializes in African American history, Afro-Latin American history, as well as Black British history. She's a native of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and received her Bachelor's of Arts in History from Howard University. Dr. Durpree-Wilson went on to obtain her law degree from Northwestern California University School of Law. Her law school trial was the advocacy thesis entitled "The Conscience of the Community: Race, Gender, and Jury Nullification in the Criminal Justice System," which examined the history of racism against African Americans and the controversies, and sentencing in the U.S. court system. So along with those things, Dr. Durpree-Wilson spent many years in the field of law, and she is recognized by her colleagues and recognized a professional calling when was tied to her passion for history. She then went on to earn her Master's of Arts and her Doctorate of Philosophy in history from Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland. Dr. Durpree-Wilson's current research focuses on the role of African American radio stations in the modern civil rights movement. She is a recipient of a number of awards, as you can see there. One of the awards include the Diversity Fellowship Award with the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. She currently serves as a commissioner for the Maryland Lynching Truth and the Reconciliation Commission, which is dedicated to researching cases of racially motivated lynchings in the state's history. She's also an advisory board member and lead historian for the forthcoming Underground Railroad exhibition at the B&O Railroad Museum in Baltimore, Maryland. Dr. Durpree-Wilson is a proud member of Phi Alpha Theta National Honor Society, the Association of the Study of African American Life and History, the Association of Black Women's Historians, Phi Delta Phi International Law Fraternity, and Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Dr. Durpree-Wilson's most recent peer-reviewed publications include "Killing Dixie," the NAACP, the Black Press, and the Crusade to End Black Caricature Culture in Hollywood from the 1950s to 1969, as well as Colorism and Interracial Discrimination Among Blacks in the United States and Brazil from 1928 to 1988. So once again, I am so proud and so excited to present to you our keynote speaker for this evening. I don't want to take any more of her time. I'll allow her to continue on to introduce herself. but more importantly, to engage us in this initial conversation. So please sit with your tent doors open to receive our keynote speaker.
Hello, hello, hello. Good evening, everybody. How are you all doing today? I just want to thank Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated, my Divine Nine brothers, and all the Greeks that are here tonight for coming on, logging in so that we can have this very important conversation. Also want to especially thank Dr. Maurice Jones for the invite. I'm just so proud of him. I can't get off the call without saying that this is my cousin, okay? This is my little cousin. I know he hates when we say that, but I'm just so proud of him and all that he has accomplished, he and his wife. So I just want to thank you all for having me here today. And again, what we're going to do, and what I always tell my students is, one of the things I hate the most is to just stand up and lecture and talk and talk and talk. I need call and response, okay? I need engagement. So if there's something that resonates with you as we go through the PowerPoint, please feel free to type in the chat or to chime in or raise your hand so that we can really turn this into a conversation, okay? So let me go ahead and share my screen here. And we're going to be talking tonight about African Americans and the evolution of the American criminal justice system, okay? All right, so now, before we can even get into the evolution of the criminal justice system, we need to go back in time, all right? We need to go back to the Civil War. And I know you're probably saying, why in the world are we going back to the Civil War? That was so long ago. Well, we need to figure out how this system came to be. First off, the Civil War is going to run in this country from 1861 to 1865. South Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Louisiana, Georgia, Texas, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas are going to break off from the United States and form their own country called the Confederate States of America. Okay, so they committed treason, formed their own country. Now, a lot of Southern historians will tell you, oh no, this had nothing to do with the issue of slavery. It has to do with states' rights. But my question is, states' rights to do what? To own slaves, okay? So a war was fought for 4 years, and ultimately the Confederate Army is going to surrender in 1865, which will essentially end Black enslavement in North America that had been going on for centuries. Abraham Lincoln is going to be killed on April 14th, 1865. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but one of the reasons why his assassin decided to kill him was because Lincoln gave a speech about giving, quote unquote, smart African Americans and African Americans who fought in the Civil War the right to vote. And we can't have that. So he was assassinated. And then in June of 1865, African American slaves in Texas, the enslaved there, are finally going to be told that they are now free. So moving into the era of Reconstruction, right? We're in 1865 to 1877. Now, we're going to get 3 laws on the books that are supposed to help African Americans transition into freedom. First off, we have the 13th Amendment, right? The 13th Amendment is going to end slavery in this country, but we have to unpack the 13th Amendment, which we'll do in a minute. That's going to come in 1865. Then in 1868, we're going to get another amendment called the 14th Amendment, which will make African Americans human beings under the law and citizens of this country. So it took a law to make African Americans human. Our Constitution counts Black people as 3/5 of a person. So you weren't even a real person under the law until 1868. Then we get to the 15th Amendment, right, which was the one that they really, really did not want to pass, but they had to pass it because of pressure from Congress. So 1870 is when we're going to get the 15th Amendment. And this is going to give Black men the right to vote. Sorry, ladies, no women are voting anyway in this country. But in 1870, we're going to get the 15th Amendment. But here's the thing. The 15th Amendment says nothing about preventing devices from the voting process, which means vote. We can do things to you to make you not vote, i.e. literacy tests.
Sorry, you got muted. Thank you for your patience, y'all. We'll get this thing together.
Oh, that's weird. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. You got to put back up your screen.
All right, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. All right, so let's keep moving. So again, I want you guys to pay very close attention to the language, and we can all see the screen, correct? All right, the 13th Amendment, let's read. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States. Remember that part of the 13th Amendment that we never talk about, that we're never briefed on in history class, because now that the majority of the African-American agricultural labor force in the South has been eliminated, we got to figure out a way to get that population back. So now Black people, I have to make you criminals because I need your servitude. And that's how we're going to get to the criminal justice system, through the criminalizing of the African-American community. Now, has anyone ever heard of the Black Codes before? Have we heard of the Black Codes? I see a few people with thumbs up. Thumbs up if we've heard from the Black Codes. Okay, so a few thumbs up. Now, these are laws that are going to be passed in the states to curb Black freedom, all right? So now, Black codes are going to ensure that we now have a subservient agricultural labor force in the South controlled by whites. But they're also going to allow Black orphans between the ages of 2 to 21 to be apprenticed to white folks against their will. Also, what it's going to do is limit what jobs African Americans could hold, so that if you don't have a job, I can now enslave you, because that's another law. It was illegal for African Americans to be unemployed. So now let's talk about more of the Black codes, because they're going to proliferate, okay? So Black people, you cannot get legally married. You cannot enter into contracts. In certain states, you cannot own property, testify in court. You can't serve on a jury. Voting, forget about it. You can't own a dog. You cannot own a gun. Spitting in public, you can be convicted for that. Talking loud in the presence of white women, you can be convicted for that. No spitting, breaking glass in public, walking alongside train tracks, selling vegetables after dark. And then we get to the pig laws, where if a white person accuses you of stealing a farm animal, you can be convicted. So here's the thing. If I make up enough laws, right, at some point, you're going to break a law. So for that reason, you're going to see an uptick in the presence, particularly as it relates to African-American men, represented in the criminal justice system. Okay, so again, vagrancy laws. This is another way in which to enslave African-Americans through the prism of convictions. Now, these are laws that forced employment for African Americans. So if you were not employed, or if you were homeless, you could serve 3 months in prison, which means now I can enslave you, because remember the trap door in the 13th Amendment. So if you were a vagrant and you decided to run away, you could be, of course, recaptured and then forced to work wearing chains. So again, this is just slavery by another name. And again, this was once again to secure that workforce in the South that had disappeared after the Civil War, because they tried to initially bring in Chinese workers to replace African Americans. That didn't work out. So now we got to figure out a way to criminalize Black folks so that now I can enslave you legally, because I can't make you a slave just to be a slave. It has to be because you are a convicted felon. Okay, so now the vagrancy laws are going to emerge. Sharecropping. We've all heard of sharecropping. I'm pretty sure some of you have had family members that have been sharecroppers, right? Thumbs up if you've had someone in your bloodline that has been a sharecropper. So for this, you're going to see white landlords saying, we will provide housing, the horse or the mule, the tools, the seeds, and all you have to do is work the land. You've been working it anyway. All you're doing is continuing your work, and we're going to provide you with a place to live, right? The problem was a lot of African Americans at this time, because it was against the law to learn how to read, could not read. So they went into contracts that were very, predatory. And also this system lent itself to cheating and exploitation. So whenever you thought you broke even, right, they would say, oh, no, 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 you still owe us $100. You can never break even. And if you try to leave, guess what happens? The sheriff comes after you. Punishment was enslavement. So once again, we're trying to secure an agricultural workforce, but we're also trying to keep African Americans in their quote unquote place in society, which is a place of servitude. Now, the convict lease system. The convict lease system. This is a system that developed in the South in various states, namely, the usual suspects, right? Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, Texas, as well as other places. And how the system works is businesses and planners will go to the prisons and they will lease prisoners to clear roads, to pick cotton, whatever they needed you to do. But the problem was this system lent itself again to African Americans being overworked, underfed, whipped, shackled, and abused. But the labor was so cheap. Why would I, pay someone to work on my land when I can go to the jail and rent them for close to nothing? And in fact, some prisoners felt slavery was better because as a slave, I'm your property. So on some level, you're vested in my well-being because you don't want me to die because I'm your property. But if you're just renting me, it's just like when you rent a car to drive a long distance. You don't want to put miles on your car. So you rather take a rental car and abuse that rental car and you return it to Hertz or wherever. You don't have a vested interest in that rental car. So that's the way planters and business owners view this convict lease system. However, the system, after people started dying even more and more, namely white men are going to enter the system, it's going to be outlawed in the early part of the 1900s. So in a lot of instances, the farms that you just left where you just picked cotton, you're back on that farm, but this time you're a prisoner and I'm not breaking any rules because the 13th Amendment says I can do it.
Dr. Durpree-Wilson, we have a quick question. The question was posed from Tiffany. She said, don't the prisoners still do that today? Don't they still follow these same systems?
Yes, prisons today still have prisoners doing labor. And even when I'm teaching at Coppin State, I remind my students, the desk that you're sitting in was made by a Maryland state prisoner. So even today, we're seeing, and you may see them on the road as well, cleaning, picking up garbage or traffic on the side of the road. A lot of times, again, states are still using prison labor to complete tasks. Yep. Are there any other questions before we continue? All right, let's keep moving. So now we're also going to see chain gangs. Now, believe it or not, people thought the chain gangs would cure the whole convict lease system. Oh, this is better than convict leasing. So this would be groups of convicts who would be forced to provide labor for states and cities, and they would be doing public road construction, digging ditches or farming, but they're all chained together. And this was great for them because, again, I don't have to pay 10 guards to watch these guys because they're all chained together. And if one tries to get away, they all are stuck together and I'll just shoot one and then, there won't be a problem. And this is going to flourish in the 1920s and 1930s. And you'll see African-American men, namely on the side of the road, all chained together. And even Sam Cooke, the singer Sam Cooke had a song called The Chain Gang, the sound of the man working on the chain gang. Because again, this was, targeting African-American men, which was, again, a predatory system. And the thing about the chain gang system is you're literally chained to shackles all day, which means you're going to get infections, injuries, ulcers. This was outlawed in most states in the 1950s, but Alabama, leave it to Alabama, they're going to bring it back in the 1990s. And here's a photograph of men working on the chain gang on a railroad. And you see there's only 2 guards there guarding them as they work. Now, we've talked about the birth of the criminal justice system, which literally was again birthed to try to secure an agricultural workforce, namely African Americans. Now we have to talk about disqualifying voters. Why do we need to do that? Does anybody have ideas why I need to disqualify an African American from voting? Remember, we have the 15th Amendment, which means Black men, you can go to the polls, right? I got to disqualify you from voting. Why do I need to do that? Any ideas? And you can just unmute and start talking, I guess, if you don't raise your hand. Any
Is it
ideas?
because the African Americans had the majority?
Say it one more time, I'm sorry.
Is it because African Americans were the majority down in those southern states?
Yes, that's one reason. Very good. Because again, during the era of Reconstruction in the Mississippis and South Carolinas, where you have a large number of African Americans voting, you're going to start to see politicians who are African American being elected. There's another byproduct of voter suppression that directly impacts the criminal justice system. Any ideas?
We have a couple comments in the chat. One says that they could vote out those that were trying to segregate.
Yes, that's true.
We also have somebody who said to try to improve the prison system, Blacks could vote to try to improve this whole system together.
Yes, that's true too. But there's one that is absolutely related to the courts. Let's look at the courts. How does me not letting you register to vote impact your, I guess, influence on the courts? What is that? Any ideas? If you're not registered to vote, what can't you do?
Be a juror?
Thank you. Be a juror.
Jury duty.
That is where we get the names from the jury pool, from the voter registration rolls. So not only am I stopping you from voting, I'm also stopping you from impacting criminal cases. Because if the jury box is lily white and there's a Black defendant there, even when the evidence is in his favor, you're going to see that all-white jury come back with a guilty verdict in like 2 seconds, okay? So thank you to whoever said that. Now, we're gonna, again, impact the jury pool. We're gonna change state constitutions. We're going to implement poll taxes, which means you have to pay to vote. Nowadays, all you gotta do is put your sweats on, roll out of bed, go vote, go to Chick-fil-A afterwards and go back to the house. Back then, you literally had to prepare for war to go vote, because not only are they going to implement poll taxes, you have to have proof of property ownership, which most African Americans did not have at the latter part of the 19th century. Literacy tests. Again, it was illegal for Blacks to learn how to read. And in the South, even a lot of white folk could not read. And the person giving you the test in a lot of cases wasn't illiterate as well. And when in doubt, we'll go to our go-to white supremacist lane, which is violence. At the end of the day, the white supremacist had violence and shotgun policy in his or her back pocket. So the night before an election, they would ride through Black neighborhoods, or when you were about to go register to vote, shooting and trying to intimidate you. But then we need to qualify your vote. So we're gonna say in Mississippi and South Carolina, we're notorious for this. They had a category called Black crimes. That's stealing, arson, and bigamy. Those convicted of those things could not vote. But white crimes, which included murder, rape, and other things, you could vote. So if you were a murderer, you could vote. But if you stole or committed arson, no voting, because those are quote unquote Black crimes. And this is gonna, again, be a mechanism for disqualifying the Black vote. And again, another way to disqualify the Black vote, the grandfather clause. First implemented, of course, in Louisiana in 1898. And the rule was if your father or grandfather was ineligible to vote in 1867, you are disqualified from voting. Remember, we said the 15th Amendment, which gave Black men the right to vote, was enacted in what year? 1870. So who is this implementing? Who is this impacting? It's impacting Black voters. And again, this will not be struck down by the Supreme Court until 1915. All right. Now, I see a question says, hasn't white mob violence historically always been used against any gains made by Blacks? Unfortunately, the answer to that question is yes, because again, violence is easy. It's quick, it's fast. And unfortunately, that's the default setting for a lot of white supremacists, even with the envy of Black success, right? As Black folks started to get educated and buy houses. And when those cars came out around 1900 and Black folks started buying cars, you would be carjacked on the side of the road, right? Made to walk. How dare you have a car and I don't have a car? So even when you're minding your own business, doing what society says you should do, which is, educate yourself, get a trade, do whatever, and try to prosper, you're going to be a target of white supremacist attacks. And that's just the way it has been, unfortunately, in this country. Segregated justice in the court system was a real thing, and some argue that this is still the case. We talked about Blacks being rejected from jury duty. All white police forces in the South, they would not allow Blacks to become police officers. And in fact, even in Baltimore, right, when the first Black cops came on the force, they would not allow those Black cops to carry guns. So you can be a cop and have the uniform on, but you cannot carry a gun. Police brutality against Blacks was, up again, something that has been with us for a very long time. Judges and lawyers, all white men in most cases. And if you walked into court with a Black lawyer, they would purposely find you guilty or give you a longer sentence. And then also you would see Black folks being convicted of the same crime as a white and getting a longer sentence. So even if I went in and robbed a bank with a white person, we're together robbing the bank, I'm going to get the longer sentence. And that was the way it was for a long, long amount of time. And of course, whites were rarely found guilty of crimes against Black folks. So you're going to see African-American men say, well, you know what? Well, maybe we can rehab our image a bit here. Maybe if we go to war, fight for our country, try to quote unquote rehab our image, surely when I come back from war, fighting for my country, that they're going to let me vote. They're going to treat me better. They're not going to try to criminalize me. They were wrong. They went, they fought in the war, and the American government would not even decorate these Black soldiers. The Harlem Hellfighters who are pictured here were not decorated by their own country. The French decorated Black soldiers during World War I. And when they came back from war, they came back to a Jim Crow America that pressed on. So now we're in the Great Depression era, 1931, the Scottsboro Boys. Have we all heard of the Scottsboro Boys? I see a couple people shaking their heads. And again, the Scottsboro Boys case may sound familiar to you because I feel like this story keeps happening over and over again. So you have 9 Black youths from the ages of 13 to 20 who are riding a freight train through Alabama looking for work, right? Because you're supposed to be working. It's the Great Depression. If you don't work, you don't eat. They were riding illegally. There were 2 white prostitutes on the train that were riding illegally. Those white prostitutes were about to be arrested. So instead of being arrested, they tried to divert the arrest and they said, that group of Black men just raped us. So the investigation went from you 2 riding illegally to 9 Black men raping you on a train. 8 of the 9 were convicted of rape and received the death penalty, even though during deposition, which is what you do when you're preparing for trial, one of the prostitutes admitted that they lied and made the whole thing up. Even after the jury got that evidence, they still went ahead and convicted 8 of the guys, okay? The Communist Party lawyers and the NAACP lawyers had to work on this case, and it took them 10 years to get them out of prison. And whenever I tell this story to my students, they're like, that sounds like the Central Park. No, we're in 1931. The same story keeps repeating itself. All right, are there any questions so far? I know this is a lot of information. Yeah, Black soldiers were lynched in their uniforms, and sometimes they would be lynched by their white soldier counterparts who were wearing the same uniform. Now, again, World War II, Black men are going to say, well, let's do it again. Okay, we're going to go to war. We're going to fight. You know, I'm going to train in Tuskegee and be a fighter pilot. Surely, after I shoot down Nazi planes, right, in the war, help liberate Europe. When I come home, I'm not going to have to walk through the back door. I'm not going to have to use the Jim Crow pools, the Jim Crow restaurants, be buried in a Jim Crow cemetery, because Jim Crow also extended to the cemeteries, beaches, and the ocean. There was a white part of the water and the black part of the water. Surely after I do all this, I don't have to go through that, and my image will be rehabbed. Once again, they came home from Europe disappointed, because now, although a lot of the men that I just introduced you to, those fighters, fighter pilots, they are now going to become civil rights activists. We now have to deal with African Americans dealing with quote unquote law and order. And we've heard that rhetoric recently, right, in the political sphere. Law and order, you know, we got to keep the inner cities in line. That's going to first start in the 1950s during the civil rights movement, as activists start to use direct action tactics, which again are the lunch counter sit-ins and the bus boycotts, to change and kill Jim Crow, right? So now you're going to see Southern governors and police forces use the rhetoric of law and order to not only suppress African-American activism, but to criminalize African-Americans, even children. You see on the right side of your screen, these are children being arrested in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963. In addition to that, after the Civil Rights Act is passed in 1964, now it's going to shift to, well, we're just going to go ahead and target crime, because, you know, these crime-ridden inner cities with all these Black folks, media coverage will focus on Black criminality. Every story will be about Black folks killing someone or robbing. Now, again, Black folks in this country have never made up 13% of the population, but all the stories, although white folks are committing just as many crimes, if not more, are not going to be shown on the news. And when a white person commits a crime, they are not going to hold that mugshot up. Chances are they'll just say the person's name, but if there's a Black defendant or a perpetrator, they will hold up the photo of that person. Oh, I see someone in the comments. I was just trying to. Any questions or thoughts or feelings before we continue? I know it's a lot of information. A lot of people were not taught this in school because, you know, unfortunately during Black History Month, we only get the bare minimum. What they have to tell us, Dr. King, Rosa Parks, occasionally Harriet Tubman, but there's so many layers to the African-American story that we need to unpack. Now, we also have the demonizing of African Americans during the era of the 1960s and 70s. And there was an attack on the Black family. They're going to paint Black men as predatory criminals, Black women as welfare queens. All they want to do is stay home, watch soaps, and have babies and not work. And also we had the Moynihan Report, which came out in 1965. The Assistant Secretary of Labor, Moynihan, is going to say that the fundamental source of weakness in the Black community is the Black family. And he's namely going to blame Black women for this. So you're going to start to see politicians run on this rhetoric when they're campaigning for office. Now we get to the war on drugs. We've heard about the war on drugs. Those of you who are around in the 80s, you remember Nancy Reagan talking about, you know, just say no. She was even on Different Strokes with the red dress and went into to the school and told the kids, say no. All you have to do is say no. Well, the war on drugs did not start in the 1980s. It started in the 70s under Nixon. Okay, and I want you guys to take a very close look at the chart on the right side of your screen. The war on drugs is going to officially start in 1982. Now look at the uptick in the prison population after that. So after Reagan passes the Anti-Drug Act in 1986, Clinton is going to come behind him in 1994 and pass the crime bill, which is the 3 strikes and you're out, which means on your 3rd strike, that's life in prison. And that's 1994. Now let's keep going. So again, you know, the war on drugs really had a terrible impact on Black folks as it relates to sentencing. And let's talk about why. So we're talking about restrictions on the access to federal programs with drug convictions and also mandatory minimum sentences. Now take a look at this. Crack versus powder cocaine sentencing. 1 to 100 is your sentence, okay? So again, African Americans and actually Black and brown folks, Afro-Latino, everybody, again, typically in inner city neighborhoods, is going to have more access to crack cocaine. Whereas you're going to see white folks and even, wealthy folks, white wealthy folks doing powder cocaine. But look at this, guys, 5 grams of cocaine crack in crack form will get you 5 years in prison. You have to have 500 grams of powder cocaine to get 5 years in prison. So a few years ago, Paris Hilton was caught with powder cocaine in her purse and she served 2 days in jail. And everyone was like, oh my God, how did she get out of that? It's because sentencing as it relates to powder cocaine is not as severe as crack cocaine. Although it's the same drug, okay? Whether it's crack or powder form, cocaine is cocaine. And it's important that we recognize this. Oh, someone said, awesome content, thank you. And both parties criminalize Blacks for political reasons, right? Usually when you wanna prove that you're quote unquote tough on crime, Black folks, we're the go-to punching bag for political parties on both sides of the aisle. Sometimes in elections on one side more than the other, but at some point in the past, unfortunately, every political party has screwed us over in some regard. So in terms of drug arrests, you're going to see African Americans being more times likely to be arrested for drug offenses. Now, we're not saying that white folks are not being caught with drugs. They are, but we're talking about being arrested, okay? So you'll see in the 1980s, there's going to be a disparate arrest rate, and the same deal is going to happen in the 90s. And by 1991, 1/4, I repeat, 1/4 of all Black men in the country are going to be part of the criminal justice system. Once again, the African American population only makes up 13% of this population. Again, you're looking at the disparate impact of sentencing as it relates to drug use and sales based on race. Once again, everybody's using and selling drugs, but unfortunately, only the African American community is being targeted as shown in these graphs. So again, drug-related incarceration, Blacks are going to be more likely. Arrest, Blacks are more, look at this number. And again, this is something that unfortunately is something that we're still dealing with. Disparate treatment as it relates to sentencing and as it relates to arrest. Now, let's talk about the policing of Black communities, which is good and it's something that we're literally still dealing with. So I'm going to go back to the 90s and we're going to come forward. I'm almost done, guys. All right. So Rodney King, and I'm pretty sure most of us were alive in 1991, right? We were alive, most of us. So 1991, 4 police officers are going from the LAPD, which has a history of brutality against Black communities. I can go back to the Watts riots in 1965 to talk about the LAPD. But we're in 91. They're going to brutally beat Rodney King, a Black motorist who had been pulled over for speeding. Okay, there was a nearby person that was filming this incident from his apartment building. He unfortunately just passed away from COVID a couple months ago. Now, the police, when they arrested Rodney King, told a different story. But once that tape got out, they're like, wait a minute, that's not what you said was happening. You said he tried to run away, he tried to do this and do that. But we have video footage of them brutally beating an unarmed Black man. The 4 officers were charged and indicted. However, they moved the case to a predominantly white neighborhood because juries matter. The jury was made up of 10 whites, 1 Hispanic, and 1 Asian. The officers were acquitted in April of 92, and the LA riots are going to ensue. By the way, the LA riots are also going to ensue because of Latasha Harlins, who was also killed and her killer went free. So imagine a 15-year-old girl who was accused wrongfully of stealing a bottle of juice is killed. Her accuser goes free. And now these 4 officers who were on tape, and also Latasha's killing was on tape too. All of them are now free. So LA is going to be set on fire. But it's not just LA, not just LA. It's also New York. It's every city, unfortunately, in the United States. But let's go to the East Coast. So we're going to see an uptick in brutalization of the Black community by the NYPD in the 90s. Abner Louima, okay, he was a Haitian immigrant, came to America, went out, to a nightclub. He tried to break up a fight. And instead of helping him break up the fight, the police are going to arrest him. But not only are they going to arrest him, they're going to beat him. And when they get him to the police station, they're going to sodomize him with a broomstick. Okay, but guess what? Look who his attorney is in this photograph. We all know who that guy is, right? Hands, thoughts, who is he? Somebody knows who he is. Who's his attorney? Johnny Cochran. Look, if I'm going to court, I want Johnny Cochran to be my attorney, because if you're going against Johnny Cochran, you're going to lose. So he's going to get Johnny Cochran coming in, taking his case, and Johnny Cochran is going to help in this, in the settlement on the civil side, which again, I'm sorry, on the criminal side, the officer is going to get 30 years in prison. And also Louima is going to get $9 million. I feel as though he should got more than that. Amadou Diallo, a Liberian American immigrant, is going to also be stopped by the police. Mistaken identity. So Amadou says, no, I'm not, that's not me. Let me show you my ID. So he reaches for his wallet. When he reaches for his wallet to pull out his ID, the police shoot him 41 times. He was alone. 41 times. And those are just the bullets that landed. We're not even talking about the shells. 41 times. So this man is killed by NYPD. And again, this is 2 years out from the situation with Abner Louima. But then we get to NYPD criminalizing hip hop culture, which again impacts African American and Latino youth in New York City primarily. So again, as we all know, most of us love hip hop culture. Started in the South Bronx in 1973. DJ Kool Herc is the founding father of hip hop. We know that hip hop has 4 elements, not one. Rap is one element of hip hop. DJing, b-boying or breakdancing, my favorite, and graffiti are also elements of hip hop culture. So now that all the Black and Latino youth are gravitating to this culture, we're going to criminalize elements of the culture. First, we're going to do graffiti art, which again, you can make the case that this is vandalism and they deserve to go to prison, but we're not sending everybody to prison. White graffiti artists are getting off with a slap on the wrist, and African American and Latinos on the subways are being targeted by the CCP program in New York. New York City Transit Police are going to target Black and brown youth. And also we have the boombox laws, which are going to target DJs, rappers, of course, and dancers. And of course, we all know the images of Radio Raheem from the movie Do the Right Thing with the box and the D batteries and all that other stuff. You're going to be targeting the segment of the population because again, there is a notion of a Black body has to be doing something wrong. And we still see this today, right? We all saw the fight in the mall in New Jersey where the 2 teenagers were fighting each other. And they all immediately rushed to handcuff the Black teenager and sat the white teenager on the bench. Because not only is there a criminalization of Black bodies, but there's also a notion that Blacks are older than we really are. So when you're a 15-year-old kid, you're not seen as a child. Tamir Rice was not seen as a child. He's seen as a grown man. Same deal with Trayvon Martin. But also New York is going to give us stop and frisk, right? Which is the process of stopping someone to detain them, question them. And they're going to hide behind the Terry v. Ohio Supreme Court decision, which says you can stop someone if you think they're committing a crime. But the problem is, guys, 90% of the stops are going to be Black and brown men between the ages of 14 and 24, and no one is even doing anything. You're walking down the street with a book bag. that doesn't look like you're up to something. And actually, I think 85% of the men that were let go had nothing on them. So stop and frisk is going to be ruled unconstitutional in 2013, but racial profiling is going to continue. Again, on the Jersey Turnpike, we're going to see racial profiling because state troopers will be stopping Black men with luxury cars searching for drugs. Black cops said, we don't believe that this is true. That's not true. That's not true. So the Black cops went undercover, pretending to be just random Black motorists, and they were pulled over when they were driving in their BMWs. And we all, of course, know about the Central Park 5 or the Exonerated 5 case, where 5 Black and Latino youths were wrongfully accused and convicted of raping a white woman. This is where Karen gets their strength from. Yes, this is Karen culture. And I always say Karen culture dates back to this era of slavery, because remember, white citizens were deputized over Black bodies. So if you saw a Black person doing something suspicious, you were in your right as a white person to question them about their whereabouts. Why are you here? What are you doing? So people have been Karening since the 19th century. All right, incarceration. Again, 47% of the nation's prison population is Black and male. Okay, 40% are between the ages of 17 and 27. And you're also going to see education really being a huge factor, lack of education and gainful employment and job skills, because we're not rehabilitating people in prison. And I want you to look at these numbers. African-American males have the highest incarceration rate out of everybody. White women, again, larceny is something that is quote unquote a white female crime, because a lot of times they're getting caught. But unfortunately, a lot of times when white women are apprehended, they're seen as victims. And there is evidence on this, data on this, not just me saying it. Black women are also going to be incarcerated at an alarming rate. But luckily, in 2019, the rate of imprisonment for Black women is going to start to come down. And we see in this graph how Black women's incarceration rates are dropping for various reasons. Some attribute it to more Black women pursuing education and trades. So, any questions? I see a few popping up. Karen and Ken, yes. All right, so now that we see Black women, the rates coming down, we're gonna get to an era where you're going to see politicians on the national level try to make amends for wrongs in the past. And that's where we get to President Barack Obama. He's going to appoint Eric Holder, who is the first African-American to hold a position of U.S. Attorney General. Loretta Lynch, who's going to be the first Black woman to hold that position. And he's also going to try to undo the damage of the '94 crime bill by phasing out, federal prison use, federal use of private prisons, and also the legalization of marijuana. There are people serving life in prison for marijuana possession or use. And now it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, marijuana. Also, Obama is going to convert over 1,000 individuals. Commute their sentences. Again, most of them, of course, were nonviolent drug offenders. But the problem is Obama did not tell people what he was doing, so he doesn't really always get the credit for trying to right these wrongs, I mean. Now, under President Obama's presidency, we also got the Black Lives Matter movement. This is starting in 2013 as a movement. It did not start as an organization. It has morphed into an organization, but initially all it was a hashtag on social media after the acquittal of the murderer of Trayvon Martin. I'm not putting his name on my slides. Black Lives Matter is going to become a nationally recognized organization as time goes on, because people are going to start to form committees, demonstrations. And again, we will look at Michael Brown's killing by the police and Eric Garner's killing by the police. And then, unfortunately, if I had to put all the names of the people murdered by the cops on my slides, we will be here till the cows come home. But Tamir Rice, a child playing with a toy gun, Walter Scott, Sandra Bland, Freddie Gray, Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, and numerous others are going to be killed as a result of police brutality. And also the assumption of guilt. Yes.
I would say we got a quick question. Question was,
Sure.
what do you say what would you say that the prison reform that was led by Trump to get low-level offenders out had an impact on the numbers of Black women decline in the prison system?
Yes, well, Trump did also contribute to commuting sentences. I think Alice Johnson's sentence was committed, and also Angela Stanton King, who is, I think she's from Atlanta. She was also, her sentence was commuted. So yes, there were prison reforms done during the era of Trump. But I think the problem was people question the sincerity of it. But the thing is, however we can get people out of prison, we'll take it, you know, and that's something that we need to look at. But again, we must recognize that commuting sentences and changing criminal justice reform should never be performative. It has to be real reform, and it has to be something that not only impacts a few people, but everybody. Someone else has a comment. Oh, the Khalif Browder story. And yes, oh, they see us when they see us. Yes, and also it says Kim Kardashian has gotten many people out. Yeah, well, I'll say this. Kim Kardashian has brought attention to the movement, but the cases that she has brought attention to have been worked on by Black female attorneys for 10 to 15 years. But sometimes celebrity star power is what it takes to bring awareness to the situation. And again, as I said before, whatever help we can get, we'll take it. Because again, when, you know, random people were saying, oh, we got to get this lady out of prison, no one was listening. But then a celebrity gets behind it and people start to pay attention. So that's when you use your celebrity for good. And again, the goal is real reform. Also, I think, oh, it says Trump also used his AG bar to prosecute some protesters. Yes, he did. A lot of times, similar to what happened during the era of civil rights, peaceful protest is being criminalized, which is unfortunate because that's your First Amendment right. But the problem now is we're also trying to make it so that people are afraid to speak up about what they believe in. You know, you protest police violence, people think you're anti-police. Well, you're not anti-police, you're anti-bad police. And that's something that we also need to consider as well when we're trying to do this important criminal justice work. The killing of George Floyd, and this is our final slide. Of course, as we all know, in May of 2020, George Floyd, a Black man, was killed in Minneapolis after being arrested. I think he was accused of having a counterfeit $20 bill. During his arrest, after he was handcuffed and on the ground, Derek Chauvin knelt on his neck. People kept saying 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I'm sorry, my watch said 9 minutes and 30 seconds, but who am I? His neck was kneeled on and he died at the scene. But the video, and I don't know if you guys saw the original police report. I do, because I'm a nerd and I like these things. I read the original police report and it makes no mention of kneeling on the neck or anything. It just says this person had health challenges that caused him to die. But they didn't know there was a video. So when the video comes out on social media, just like with Rodney King, when they did the police report, they did not know there was a video. So the video went viral on social media, and this really triggered worldwide protests. Okay, there were protests in Brazil. The Quilombo population in Brazil had a mass protest. Throughout Germany, there was protests, France, everywhere. And really, this really called to action a lot of people who wanted to do criminal justice reform to address police brutality, police racism, and also the lack of accountability. Because even after you get charged, we know people are getting acquitted in court, right? So believe it or not, Chauvin is going to be found guilty in April of 2021 for Floyd's murder. And a lot of the things that came out of Floyd's murder really, again, just brought a racial reckoning to various things. I mean, they even took Aunt Jemima off the Aunt Jemima box after this case was revealed. Like there was a transformation in society, and some people say, oh, it's very performative and it doesn't impact real change. But again, you know, I always tell people, and I tell my students this all the time, civil rights work is slow work. You're not going to get everything you want overnight. And sometimes it takes time to get reform. And that's what we're seeing even in the case of the criminal justice system. So that is, oh, and someone mentioned police unions. Absolutely. That is very, very important, because they tell you to say the line, "I fear for my life," or, to justify, or the other thing they do is they demonize the person that was murdered. Oh, when he was 10 years old, he did this and he did that. Someone else is saying, what is your position on reparations and what are your feelings on the topic? My feelings on reparations are that I believe African Americans are owed reparations. Every population that has, quote unquote, been wronged by the United States has received some form of reparations. We see it with Native Americans. We see it with the Japanese who were interned during World War II. We see it with the Jewish population. We see it with several subsets of society. But whenever African Americans, one, mention slavery, there's a rolled aisle. Here they go again. Whenever we talk about Black history, we don't say Black history. They'll call it critical race theory, which literally is not the same thing. Critical race theory is taught in law school. My third grader is not in law school. Oh, they're going to teach it in the schools. No. So my belief is that reparations is owed to African Americans because 250 years of free service, and also Field Order 15, which was a special order implemented by the federal government at the end of the Civil War, promised that every African American family would get 40 acres and a mule. That's not me. The government promised that to Black families. It only happened to, I think, about maybe 100,000 Black families did get that 40 acres and a mule. And to this day, those families are some of the wealthiest families in the United States. So imagine what Black America would look like if we had gotten Field Order 15, implemented in our society. And that's it from my presentation.
I would say we actually have a couple other questions that came in. If you don't mind, just continue to engage us on those aspects. One of the other questions that came in was, as we hear all this information and we appreciate all this information that came in, what actionable step can we take? Or in other words, what can we do in our roles, in our current roles in society, our individual roles, to improve the overall system? What small steps can we make?
That's an excellent question. And for me, my mind just races back to the 15th Amendment and voting. And the problem is we have to vote these elected leaders out who want to sit on their laurels and not implement bills that are literally sitting in the Senate right now. So I say all that to say local elections on the state level and federal elections are very important. And I feel as though if we change leadership in this country, especially as it relates to Congress, I feel as though we can get more reform done. Because if we leave it up to, like someone said, the police unions, just to make a change or have a sensitivity training, who are we recruiting to be police officers? So I feel as though there needs to be laws on the books to govern this. There needs to be a police database that says this person killed someone in Pennsylvania. So when they go to try to apply for a job in Florida, we know their track record. And that is sitting in the George Floyd Justice Bill. But unfortunately, it's hit a stalemate in the Senate. So I feel as though we need to change our leaders and vote.
Thank you. Another question that came in, and they're going to pull a couple more from the chat. Question is, as we're sharing this with our friends, families, colleagues, and everybody, as we share the information we received today, what can we share to spread the knowledge about the design of the system and how it has negatively impacted the African American community? Like, what are some elevator speeches or some nuggets that we can share with our colleagues and friends and family?
Well, I would say definitely talk about the evolution of the criminal justice system, but we also need to hone in on its creation. The criminal justice system was created to keep African Americans in a subservient position for the purposes of securing an agricultural workforce to draw from. It has evolved because I always tell people, things like this are shapeshifters, but we need to remember why it was created. And also when people make claims that, oh, this isn't who we are, we're better than this, are we? This is what we've done historically. So that is why, I always press upon people, You always need to have history in your back pocket. Some people just want to get up and talk and fight. I don't talk and fight with people if I don't have history on my side and the statistics, facts. And in order to understand the criminal justice system, we need to unpack the history and the facts. And we can't have honest conversations if we don't do those things.
Thank you. Another one we had in the chat was, what are your thoughts towards the CRT? And basically, yeah. So what are your thoughts towards CRT?
Well, I think CRT is very important because it does what I just did. Talks about laws. And again, your children are not being taught critical race theory in school. People want to equate Black history with critical race theory, and that's not what it is. Me telling you about Dr. King and the the lunch sit-ins and SNCC and the NAACP, that's not critical race theory. But me telling you about vagrancy laws and even the criminal justice laws that we've unpacked here today, that would be more akin to critical race theory. Again, taught in law school to explain why laws are the way they are and how race has impacted the law. So if we're in the vein of law, I think it's very important that we understand what it is. So we definitely should not try to bury it, but unfortunately it has become a political talking point. And if I bet you some of the people who are anti-critical race theory, if you put a gun to their head, they would not be able to explain it to you because they don't know what it is. They just think that their second grader who is being taught about Rosa Parks is learning critical race theory. Yep.
Thank you for that. Are there any other questions? Anybody want to unmute and ask a question that you might have? Any other questions that we have in the chat? We have about another 10 more minutes for another 5 more minutes, excuse me, for our Q&A section before we come to our close and our final thoughts.
I don't have a hi, good evening. This is Tawanda. I don't really have a question, but I just wanted to first thank you for the information. I did provide some different Netflix documentaries that you could pull up to watch that really covers a lot that you talked about today. But when we talk about, really discussing race in the school systems, which, of course, is something that's so needed. I've been in the education field for about 24 years now. And I'm going to be honest, I had a school that I went to in New York, and I overheard third graders talking, and it was a black young, a young black girl and then 2 white boys. And the young black girl, made a comment about what they did, or to the white boys, what they did, and, saying that you guys did this to us. And I really had to step in, and I had to really say to the young lady, you shouldn't be blaming them for things that happened in the past, because we have to teach both sides of the story. The same way that there were white people who did these things that were mean to Black people. And I'm speaking on this level because I just want you to kind of understand how I had to approach it. There were also white people who helped Black people, and we can't hold a whole race accountable. And the young men, you could see how hurt they felt, because, and that's why I say it's such a fine line right now, especially with everything that has happened in our society and how we do present this information to our kids, and, and not to just be one-sided about it. I guess I'll say that, because I don't want anybody's feelings to be hurt, whether you're white, Black, purple, green, whatever the case. We have to find a way to move forward. And how do we move forward, especially in our education system, so that it is taught appropriately, but not completely just left out?
Well, yeah, you're right. It definitely needs to be taught. I know, I'll never forget, I think this may have been my first semester teaching on the college level, and I had an older white gentleman, looked like he was maybe in his 50s. He was one of my students. And he said, by the way, I teach at an HBCU. So he came up to me, a white gentleman, and said, you're going to please don't, take it easy on me. I'm so sorry about everything that we've done. And, that whole thing. And I said to him, we're not here to beat up on anybody.
Right.
What we're here to do is to tell the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, the truth is very uncomfortable. But what we cannot do is sweep it under the rug for the purposes of, you know, not making people feel uncomfortable, because for me, it's very uncomfortable to know the things that my ancestors endured, right? And not just way back, I'm talking about my grandparents. So I say all that to say it's very important that we approach history in an honest way, to have a conversation, and also to make people know that this is not an attack. All this is saying, this is what happened, this is what happened.
But when do we
have an
even talk
aha
about
moment.
the, you know, the situations of African Americans who weren't slaves, who were educated, who did have, they had businesses and they were thriving. Like, we have chosen to only talk about the slavery and the bad things because they are still going on. They are still going on. And I totally understand that. But I do wish our platforms start to change and show our young, brothers and sisters that you don't have to feel like we weren't all oppressed. Like, there were some good
I'll push back on that.
situations.
I'll push back on that point only because although we had African Americans during the era of slavery who were free, who had businesses, a lot of you are in Philadelphia. James Fortin was one of the wealthiest men in the country. He could not vote. Pennsylvania said it is illegal. His white workers could vote. He could not vote. So even in the midst of being a free African American, having rights, having money, there were certain things. Free Blacks could not own dogs until after, I think, so there were certain things that you were still oppressed under, although you had certain rights. But again, it is very important to recognize the sacrifices that our ancestors have made, whether they were enslaved or free. Also, our white allies who have helped us through the struggle. But also, we must.
And I'm just playing devil's advocate when I even say some of these things.
But we need people. Look, we need people to play devil's advocate.
I just think both sides need to be expressed. Like, we don't constantly want to, because if we don't ever hear the good, then how do we know we had good? And that I don't know. Some people thrive on the negative, and then it's like, okay, well, I'm going to just be this person because I've never had anything. This is what we come from, opposed to really letting them see that we are kings and queens. We come from more than that. So anyway, but I'm not going to take the whole 10 minutes.
No, it's fine. And also, again, in terms of our lineage, of course, ancestral Africa. But also, I always tell people who, because there was this one person I was talking to, and I don't think we should ever talk about slavery again, because that's not successful Black people. And I said, if you can make it through a 3-month journey on a ship where you are literally chained and only unlocked once a day to go to the bathroom, you're being raped repeatedly overnight as a Black woman on a ship, you make it to the United States, you make it to a plantation, you have succeeded. And if you don't believe me, Black people on this call tonight, go to the mirror and look in the mirror. You are proof that people who went through that middle passage were successful in surviving. And sometimes surviving is the success that we need to celebrate when we talk about the slave story. In addition to all of our heroes who were free people of color, surviving the middle passage, slavery, Jim Crow. By the way, the Voting Rights Act won't come till 1965. The Housing Rights Act will not come to 1968. And some of you on this call were probably born before 1968. We are survivors. We are more than survivors. So for us as African-American people, we should never be made to feel that we can't talk about our history. Everybody else gets to talk about their history and their oppression. But as soon as we fix our lips to talk about Black history, here they go again, slavery. No, we're trying to show you that we have survived all of this. And look at us now. We are thriving. So I think that's very important to recognize.
Definitely good feedback. We appreciate the input from the audience. Dr. Durpree-Wilson, we appreciate you to the fullest. I just want to remind us once again of our 4 agreements for our courageous conversation. And as we got the feel just now, it's okay to have a constructive conversation and courageous conversation. Remember, we agreed to stay engaged, which you all have done, and I applaud you. Thank you so much for your level of engagement. Of course, it's easy when you're given this type of information, especially from a dynamic and an engaging professor like Dr. Durpree-Wilson. But sometimes through Zoom and the vehicle that we have, it gets difficult. You get tuned out. But I don't know about you, and I'll speak for myself. I definitely received any and all of that information that Dr. Durpree-Wilson just gave us, and I appreciate that. So thank you for your level of engagement. Two, we also agreed to expect and to the experience of discomfort, reliving and rehashing those things that some of us, as was mentioned, we were never taught that in school. But as we see it through documentaries on Netflix, documentaries on TV, it is uneasy for us. I was getting some text messages, some things of that people, we don't have to go back that far in our lineage and our heritage of stories of people who were criminalized and treated disrespectfully from police officers. You know, I mean, we always have that controversy, the black versus blue, and all those different things. So we don't have to go that far back in our history for that. So that conversation can be very uncomfortable. Third, we definitely agreed to speaking our truth. This is our ancestry. This is our truth. I definitely am going to use that quote, Dr. Durpree-Wilson, of that the history, as long as we tell our truth and we're honest about our history, let the chips fall where they may. That was very, very good information that you gave us. And fourth but not least, we have to expect and we have to accept the lack of closure. As we see, we are living an ongoing battle dealing with our history and dealing with these courageous conversations. So we have to accept that we're not able to solve all of our problems tonight, but we will definitely move things forward, and we're pushing the train in the right direction. So I appreciate you all. I put the link in the chat for you to please fill out the survey. There will be future conversations for this. In the survey, there's a spot for you to suggest some other topics, because our goal in this particular platform is to bring to you the experts like Dr. Durpree-Wilson that have been studying this. This is her life's work. She's published on multiple platforms. She has studied this on has multiple degrees to show for this. So this is her life's work. So she has given to us her nuggets of wisdom that she has learned along the way. So you give us the topic and we'll find the expert to bring that topic to you. So we appreciate you for being here. Please fill out that survey link that is on here. Our next Courageous Conversation session will be held on March 9th. I repeat, March 9th. 7:14, same platform, same place, same time. March 9th is a Wednesday at 7:14. The topic of this particular discussion is revolving mental health and awareness, as well as self-care. Another topic that in our community is definitely kind of swept under the rug and not utilized to its fullness. We have a dynamic group of panelists, a dynamic group of experts who, once again, this is their life work. This is the research that they have put in their entire life, and they're the experts on this content. So we will be examining the courageous conversation of mental health and wellness, as well as the appropriate ways to self-care, how we overcome traumatic experiences, how we overcome trauma in many different forms. I will kick the mic one time to Dr. Durpree-Wilson for any other comments, any last closing discussions before we close out.
Well, again, I want to thank you all for the invitation. Again, Dr. Maurice, can't say it enough. I am so, so proud of you. You are awesome. And again, you know, if anyone wants to reach out to me, you can find me on Coppin State University's website. You know, again, if you want more information about where I got my sources in terms of presenting the material, I'm open to sharing that with you. And also, please, please, please continue the conversation around history as it relates to us, because we are beautiful people and we have so much to offer the world. And I'm just happy that we're able to really hone in and share and nurture each other in the celebration of Black History Month. So thank you again for the invite, Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated, my Divine Nine family. Thank you.
Thank
you
so
all
much.
once again. This presentation has, this session has been presented by the Pennsylvania, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania educational team, and has been brought to you as stated by the brothers of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated. We love all of our brothers. We love our sisters that are on here, Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated, all of our Divine Nine brothers and sisters. Please, next time, March 9th, 7:14, extend the invitation to somebody else. Each one bring one so that we can continue to get the information that we need to go back out into our communities to start these courageous conversations. So remember the platform, remember the place, remember the time. And until next time, please, blessings, peace and blessings, and be safe, everybody.
Good night. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoyable. Great job.
Thank you.